Hello and welcome back to my channel and to my retrospective of the BBC TV Shakespeare. Now, at this point, we reach the third season of this series and they changed producer. They went from Cedric Messina, who approached it in a rather conventional, traditional way, to Jonathan Miller, very self-conscious polymath and intellectual. And immediately, the tone and the style of the series changes. So you get some new titles, which are very sort of literary, sort of printed text, like a folio, instead of all that jolly music at the start. And that gives you an indication of where Miller is going. And right from the beginning of this, the first production, Taming of the Shrew, we see where Miller is going. First of all, we get these three guys come on screen and they speak the verse at a rate of knots. Now, it talks about this in this programme to the BBC DVD collection. It says, this was a good move by Miller, that he modernised Shakespeare, and he got the actors to speak the verse as if they were just speaking to each other instead of intoning it. I'm not so sure that I agree, because all it means is that the audience finds it very hard to follow what people are saying. On top of this, Miller brings a self-consciously intellectual approach to the series. So first of all, Taming of the Shrew is a comedy, it's a romp, and he sort of allows the actors to go into a really mannered, over-the-top style of acting. So they're constantly prodding each other or feeling each other's beard. It's kind of really irritating. It's like there are a series of nervous tics, and the actors are really indulged. The best example of this is John Bird of John Bird and John Fortune. Do you remember those? The two guys in the Rory Bremner show who used to do a little political satire. I saw them live, and they were very boring, actually. John Bird's performance in this, he's the guy who imitates Vicentio at the end, is very sort of smart aleck. It's almost as though he's kind of going wink wink at the audience, and I can't even bother to take this too seriously. And that sort of sums up the sort of overplaying of the actors. Compare, for example, the performance of John Franklin Robbins in this play, where he's the father of the Shrew. Compare him to the next performance he'll give as Antonio in The Merchant of Venice. You can see the difference in acting styles, and it kind of gets on my nerves, to be quite honest. To be fair to Miller, though, he did something of a casting coup here. Taming of the Shrew is one of the early comedies. It's never been a favourite of mine. It used to be a favourite in the repertory, but no one does it anymore because of the feminist connotations, because it's essentially about a bloke who he wants to marry this woman for her money, and he spends the entire play bringing her to heel, right? And controlling her. She's a shrew, she's quite loud and voluble, she kicks off, and he basically brings her down to earth and controls her. And that's the fun of the play. So for a modern, feminist audience, it's quite hard viewing. In the past, it used to be played as a great big romp. I keep thinking of Howard Keel, is it in Kismet, when he sings Kiss Me Kate and all that. I keep thinking of him in that. But it was always done as a sort of romp and a bit of fun. Now, to Jonathan Miller's credit, he doesn't take that approach. What he does is he's thought through this for a modern audience. How are we going to do this? And he does it very cleverly. So what he does is, all the romp stuff is moved onto everyone else in the cast, and they massively overact. Particularly if you know the actor, watch out for Jonathan Cecil. His performance is very over the top. So he moves it all. But the central partnership, which is brilliantly played by Jonathan Cleese and Karen Bedell, right, that becomes very real. Instead of being a smart-ass, Petruchio, the John Cleese character, actually is very smart. He's the most intelligent person on screen. And it's conveyed that he's doing this because he's really falling in love with her. And he really wants them to have a solid marriage. So there becomes a centre of seriousness and genuine passion at the centre of this silly play. And that really helps for a modern audience. It was a real casting coup of Jonathan Miller to cast John Cleese, who was, of course, a famous sitcom star. He'd been in Monty Python and then he'd been in Fawlty Towers. To pick John Cleese and put him at the centre of a Shakespeare production was a huge deal. And Cleese really rises to the task. He's quite superb. Frankly, when he and Karen Bedell are not on screen, this production falls apart and becomes intensely irritating. When they're on screen, it's really arresting and interesting and memorable. Incidentally, this is one of the joys of this series, as I keep saying, that it did these casting coups of taking popular TV stars. In terms of sitcom actors, watch out, of course, also for Mr. Peacock from Are You Being Served? Frank Thornton, he plays Gremio. And there's also John Barron, who played CJ from Reggie Perrin. He turns up as Vicentio at the end. And that was one of the joys of watching these things. Actually, they're two of the best actors in it, those two. So it's a good production in the sense that it's thought about how do we present this old-fashioned play. But it's a bad production in the sense that it's too indulgent. I mean, you know, it becomes a bit fussy. Like, for example, all the attempts to try and show the house that the Shrew lives in as a kind of Vermeer painting, which doesn't really add very much to the overall production. Also notice that that first scene in the house, it's all done in a set with rooms linked by one corridor, and it's all done in one shot, and it's brilliantly directed. But does it really add to our sense of the play? I'm not convinced. So this production is impressive in so many ways, especially in that central relationship, but it's also really irritating in other ways, and it doesn't bode well, really, for the rest of Jonathan Miller's producership. Now, there was another sitcom casting coup coming up for the next production, The Merchant of Venice, which I think is far superior. And this was that they cast Warren Mitchell as Shylock. Although, you know, on this BBC box set, it's rather embarrassing. In the title page on the DVD, they've got Frank Finley's face, because they did a version of it in 1972, and they've put his photo up. Poor old Warren Mitchell. Anyway, now Warren Mitchell, for those people who are not British, was a household name in Britain for what is now considered a very controversial series. It was a sitcom, the most popular sitcom of its time, late 60s, early 70s, called Till Death Us Do Part. And it featured a character called Alf Garnett, and he was a ranting, raving, xenophobe racist in this kind of working class family in London. And it was a very controversial series. It was written by a guy called Johnny Speight. It was controversial because the idea was that this was a satire on this kind of Little England person, right? But a lot of people agreed with what he was saying, and it became a big talking point. It was actually remade in the United States, and Speight was executive producer, as it's called All in the Family. And it became a famous sitcom over in America where the central character was a kind of racist, bigot character in America. So Warren Mitchell was a hugely successful, very popular actor, right? And he was connected with this Alf Garnett character. This series is now never shown and has been sort of forgotten. But even as a kid, it had finished when I sort of, got to age. But even I knew who Alf Garnett was. That's how popular it was. So this was an extraordinary coup to cast him as a Jewish character, because of course Warren Mitchell was Jewish. But it's a sign of the times that a lot of people didn't think of Alf Garnett as Warren Mitchell as Jewish. It might sound bizarre now, but they didn't. So to cast him in this part would have rocked and fascinated a lot of audiences at the time, right? And Warren Mitchell really attacks Shylock in this sort of old style of for years, Shylock was a sort of big bogeyman in English theatre, and various actors enjoyed being the sort of pantomime villain. This kind of, it's a very anti-Semitic sort of, moustache-twirling villain performance. And it was only about the 1820s that someone started to do a more sympathetic portrait of Shylock. It may have been Keane, I think, who did this version. My own feeling about this character was changed dramatically when Trevor Nunn tackled the play in the late 90s. And he worked with an actor called Henry Goodman. And Henry Goodman played Shylock much more realistically as a Jewish man in a society that doesn't follow his religion or his code of honour, and he's fighting it. And I can tell you now, it's one of the most radically changing performances I've ever seen of Shakespeare. It completely changed my attitude towards this play. It completely changed my attitude towards the character. It is a quite brilliant performance. It was actually filmed, you can see it. Henry Goodman as Shylock, still the best Shylock I've ever seen, right? But this performance was about 20 years before, and Warren Mitchell is still playing the sort of villainous Jewish character. And he plays it with a tremendous amount of energy. He's a real scurrying, nasty little figure. The whole thing about is Merchant of Venice anti-Semitic or not? It is. This was a time in England where Jewish people were almost persona non grata. And prejudice against them, particularly religious prejudice, was quite open and overt. But what's interesting is to compare this play with The Jew of Malta by Christopher Marlowe. And there you see quite a difference. The Jew of Malta is, bad. He's just a bad guy, right? He's a Bond villain, right? But the thing about The Merchant of Venice is, even though I don't think you can totally acquit Shakespeare of anti-Semitism, Shylock has some of the best speeches and some of the most humanist speeches in the whole play. There's that fantastic speech that says, if you prick us, do we not bleed? Do we not feel the sun the same as you? Are we not human beings? One of the great humanist speeches in Shakespeare. But he also has that fantastic speech in the trial at the end, doesn't he? That fantastic moment when he says, look, you've got slaves. Are you going to release them? Are you going to let them have as fine clothes as you have? Let them have as fine bedclothes? No, you're not. So what are you getting on to me for? That's actually a brilliant speech. It's often forgotten, but it's brilliantly delivered by Warren Mitchell in this play, in this production. So even if Shakespeare did carry some anti-Semitic values that he had in his society, he still presents a human being that all these years later we can revisit Shylock and sort of reappraise him. And that's the genius of it, really. It's a very odd play, isn't it, Merchant of Venice? God, it's bonkers. I remember, when I was talking about Measure for Measure, when I was studying Shakespeare at university, critics and pundits of Shakespeare, they have what are called 3 problem plays. They're technically comedies, right? But the sort of sympathies of the audience are so taken, and things are so dark and dramatic that they're called problem plays. And those problem plays are Measure for Measure, All's Well That Ends Well, and Troilus and Cressida. I would add Merchant of Venice because of the problem of Shylock, right? And because of the trial scene. The trial scene is horrible. It's just horrible. They utterly humiliate Shylock, while admitting that legally and in terms of reason he's actually right. And it is a horrible, and I think deliberately horrible. I think even Shakespeare meant it, that this was a person against his own society, and how that society conspires, literally conspires, because Portia, who's supposed to be our heroine, isn't Portia a bit of a cow? She's horrible, isn't she? She dresses up to condemn a man, take away his fortune, take away his religion from him, all for a merry jape. Then she compounds it by being a bit nasty to her new husband, forcing him to give up the ring from his lover, and then taunting him with it when he gets back. She's a bit of a sod, isn't she? She spent the first half of the play mooning around, feeling a bit sorry for herself because she's got all these suitors who have to look in some caskets to be her husband. But then, in the second part of the play, she suddenly becomes this real gal, this real rebel, who thinks she can decide everyone's life for them. So that trial scene is really uncomfortable. Now, this production was directed by Jack Gold, who was an excellent director at that time. He was known for a BBC play for today called Bar Mitzvah Boy. He's a Jewish director, and he also did a very good film called The Reckoning, which is worth checking out if you've never seen it. He was a good director, and at the end of the trial scene, he has a full-on close-up of Warren Mitchell forced to kiss a cross. It's very hard to watch. So this is a problem play, right? This production is fairly straightforward. It's not particularly revolutionary. It's not particularly different, but I quite liked it for that. The casting of Portia is unusual. It's played by Gemma Jones, very famous actress, a superb actress, brilliant speaker of the verse. The moment when her and Bassanio come together is so beautiful in this production. She's a bit old, but then John Nettles opposite her as Bassanio is also a bit old for the part, to be honest. It's a strange choice, Gemma Jones, because Gemma Jones was famous for playing sort of weaker women. She often played sort of middle-class wives and everything bad happened to them, probably because of her face, I don't know. she's much better here in the second half of the play than she is in the first half. And in the first half, you're almost wishing that her maid, played by the excellent actress Susan Jameson, was actually Portia. She's got more of the feel, more of the punch of Portia, you know. But Gemma Jones is very good in the trial scenes in the latter half of the play. John Nettles, just before he was about to become really famous as Bergerac and later on as Inspector Barnaby in Midsummer Murders, is very good as Bassanio, speaks the verse beautifully, absolutely gorgeous. Watch out also for John Rhys-Davies, a famous actor from things like, you know, Lord of the Rings and Raiders of the Lost Ark, in a tiny bit role as Celerio. I think that's the only... and also Kenneth Cranham. Kenneth Cranham plays the sort of Mercutio figure of Merchant of Venice, the fun guy, Gratiano. I don't really see Kenneth Cranham as a fun guy. He seems a bit awkward here somehow. I also think I'm going to mention Richard Morant as Lorenzo, who speaks the verse beautifully. The scene where he and Jessica lie together under the moonlight is beautifully directed and beautifully spoken. It's a very strange play. You know what, though? For all its problems, I really like Merchant of Venice. It's such a complex play, and what I like about it is it's very odd. It starts off with a guy who is sad for no apparent reason. A lot of pundits think he's sad because he actually has a homosexual love which can't be requited for Bassanio. I can almost understand that because it's never really explained, and it's how Shakespeare chooses to set off the play. Then we have this bizarre kind of Gothic idea that this girl is chained by her father's will to the selection of these caskets. It reminds me of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. You have chosen wisely, and everything in the play is about money and about transactions, human life as transactions. And even though the play goes off in all sorts of weird directions, I mean, the fool, Gobbo, is really irritating, and is really irritatingly played by, I'm going to find his name because he really annoyed me, N. Reitel. Dreadful performance. Though check out his father. Do you recognise his father, the blind father? Yes, it's Wally from Last of the Summer Wine. But everyone's is a relationship of transaction. Even Bassanio wants Portia because she's got a great fortune. And that's another reason why I think this is a problem play. It's not a straightforward comedy where everyone's straightforwardly nice. It's complex. Even Jessica, when she goes off with Lorenzo, has to give him a dowry, a casket of jewels. And so that sort of venality of Venetian society is well explored, and that gives power to Shylock's anger against her. You've taught me to be a villain. You taught me to want revenge. You taught me the terms of your society, which is mercantile. Venice is a mercantile society. I'm not the only one who cares about money. You all care about money. And the whole play exposes that. So just like Measure for Measure is about law and mercy, this is about money and life and love in a mercantile society. And I'm watching it again, even though it has a very strange structure. It finishes basically with Act 4 in the trial, and then you got into a nice lovey-dovey aftermath, which goes on forever. Despite all of that weird structure, I think this is a brilliant play. The verse is superb, and it's very complex and interesting and satisfying. Thanks very much.